I'm Charles McCain. During the time that I researched my novel, I had to find books that contained a whole lot of detail about daily life in the Third Reich. And I found that the best books were either contemporaneous diaries, of which there are only a handful, or kind of quickie books by news people. The first book that I'm going to review is called Berlin Diaries. It's by one of the more fascinating books. It's by Marie Wasilichikov, which I haven't pronounced correctly, Berlin Diaries 1940 to 1945. Marie, or Missy as she was known, was a royal White Russian princess, which she reminds us of 3 or 4 times in the book, because her sister is going out with several German princes, or one German prince who is not royal, and she's very clear about that. Missy was a stateless person. She actually was born in Russia on the eve of the Russian Revolution in 1917. She ended up in Germany. She spoke 8 languages, and so she ended up having a job at the propaganda ministry, or the Promi as they call it, and that's how she supported herself. She was also related to all the top nobility of Germany, and so she had these weird experiences where, she'd be sort of typing all week, and then she'd have an invitation to go to somebody's castle for a weekend or something, and just this dichotomy is sort of strange. She's getting off the train once at the Berlin station, and the former Emperor of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm's grandson, helps her with her luggage. So these are the kind of people that she runs into. Missy kept this diary in her own code, and in 1976 she was diagnosed with leukemia, and her brother convinced her that she needed to decode her diary, in essence, and have it published. And she understood that the value of the diary lay in its contemporaneous form, that she should not change anything. And the reason why she might have wanted to change things is because while the book is called Berlin Diaries, it probably should be called How World War II and the Nazis Interfere with My Social Life. But that, of course, makes it quite fascinating because of the small details that she puts in. And there are 2 of them I'm going to talk about that will give you a sense of Missy and of this book, which I give 5 stars to because it's one of the few like it. After a terrible air raid on Berlin, Missy and her sister are walking down one of the main streets of Berlin, and a policeman blows a whistle because the wall of a building is about to collapse into the street. And so she writes, "We all flung ourselves to the ground. I hid my head under my arms when the rumble and clatter of yet another collapsing wall ceased, and we were covered with water and dust. I looked up across a puddle into the smudged face of Count C.K., who was actually the chargé at the Japanese embassy. Although Tatiana and I had been studiously cutting him for the last 4 years, because he's a terrible cat, I said to myself that in times like these, all men are brothers, and trying a friendly smile, I exclaimed in English, 'Hello.' He eyed me coldly and inquired, 'Have we met?' I decided that this was not the time for formal introductions, and scrambling back to my feet, hurried on. Now, just imagine the scene. These people were all covered in soot and dust, and, of course, he knows exactly who she is. And the fact that people would maintain that kind of sort of social stupidity in the midst of this kind of unbelievable tragedy is you find constantly in the diary. It's as if they're going to maintain their structure, their social lives, no matter what. And this is one of the funnier parts. I burst out laughing when I first read it. The other part is people ask me, there's a scene in my book where somebody just mentions ping pong, and people ask me about that. And Missy says in her diary for the 22nd of December, 1943, "We play ping pong all the time. And I am reading many trashy books to the disgust of my parents. I can't concentrate on anything else." So, it's sort of the same thing. Here's somebody reading trashy novels and people disapproving. You should read something serious. Of course, the city's being bombed. How can she concentrate? And when she's not reading, she's playing ping pong. Not what you think people in Berlin did. This is by far one of the more fascinating and one of the handful of contemporaneous diaries to come out of Berlin. Missy lived in Berlin throughout the bombing of the city, And this is one of the few diaries that exist where someone wrote about that experience. Missy often falls asleep in the midst of bombing raids because she's so tired. But there's some terrifying moments that she describes. And although I give it 5 stars, and I do recommend it, like all books often about the Third Reich, there's something not quite right about this book. And what's not quite right about it is this. Missy worked for Adam von Trott and was his secretary. Adam von Trott was one of the key leaders of the German resistance against Hitler. He had been educated in England, and he was against the Nazis and Hitler long before they came into power. And he was so against them that when he was executed after the plot to kill Hitler of July 20th, 1944, his college at Oxford painted his name on the wall of graduates who had died fighting against the Germans. Every single person who had any connection whatsoever, it could be the smallest connection, to any of the plotters in the July 20th, 1944 conspiracy to kill Hitler, were detained and interrogated by the Gestapo. It's hard to believe that Missy wasn't detained. She was the guy's secretary for about a year or two. She knew him socially. She knew his wife. And so as you read through the book, you're sort of like, why doesn't that come up? Well, it never does. And those pages of the diary are conveniently missing. So here again, as with any book on the Third Reich, you have to assume that whoever wrote it probably had something they didn't want to talk about. Because if Missy were arrested and interrogated by the Gestapo and she survived, how did she do that? Did she rat somebody out? It's the only conclusion I can come to. So when you read that, if you read the book, keep that in mind. It increases the fascination. Once again, the book is Berlin Diaries, 1940-1945 by Marie Wasilchikov, and it's quite worth the time to read it.